Justice Lafoy, members of the Assembly, to buíochas orm, báil an buíochas a chur an úildíh as an gura chun teacht an seo agus labhairt libh inniu. It's a privilege for me to address this Assembly on such an important issue, and particularly today is a challenging topic like many of the others that you've been looking at are, because we're dealing with something really important and valuable to each of us, our individual freedom to make decisions about our lives. We are in the process at this point in healthcare more generally in really moving away from an older view of autonomy, one which really put the focus on others and much less on the individuals. And I think it's a really good thing that we move away from this, so that we have less of clergy running people's lives, fewer situations where husbands are telling their wives what to do, and likewise that doctors now recognize the importance of patients' autonomy. I think this is a really good thing to move away from that past focus on the others, which have minimized the role of the individual. But at the same time, we have to ask about what it is that we're moving towards. I think we need to be very careful that we don't swing to the other extreme. And there are some views of autonomy which have moved too much in that sort of direction. Probably one of the most influential textbooks in medical ethics and healthcare ethics has been this book by Beecham and Childress that first came out in the 1970s and has gone through 7 editions. And you see a view of autonomy expressed here that has become very prevalent within healthcare and with abortion in particular. They define it personal autonomy, that it encompasses self-rule that is free from both controlling influences by others and limitations that prevent meaningful choice, such as adequate understanding. In the context of abortion, then these factors of this definition become very important through the idea of freedom of choice. We see the central ideas here that it's about self-rule, which goes back to the original Greek words that underlie the term autonomy. But this idea that we should be free from controlling influences of others, so that when a woman finds herself pregnant and doesn't want the baby, that she should have freedom from interference of others that would want to suggest that she do something she doesn't want to do, or that we should have freedom from limitations that prevent meaningful choice. This approach to what has been called self-rule autonomy certainly sounds attractive to many of us in many different ways, but I would hold that it has some serious limitations. One of those is the isolation that can come about from the focus on the individuals and not on those that are around one another and our relationships. But there are other ways in which this form of self-rule autonomy really does not work in the world that we live in, because we accept limitations to our autonomy in many different ways. The self-rule approach really stresses the individual, but in reality, in our relationships, in our society, we have a different way that we have to live out our lives. We accept limits, for example, medically. If somebody shows up at the hospital and says, I want narcotics, and they're not in pain, the doctors are not going to say, well, okay, if it's your choice, you're entitled to those. Likewise, if we have a healthy appendix and say, you know, I want it removed, we're not going to simply get that because it's our choice. But legally, we also bring in many limitations to our autonomy. Many of us, I bet, might express our autonomy by not wishing to pay our taxes. But we have laws all around us that limit our autonomy. They go from the trivial to obeying the rules of the road, to really important things like saying that people are not allowed to sell their bodies even though they might want to as prostitutes, or even to sell parts of our bodies as organs, even though we might choose to donate them in that way. Ethically, we likewise say that there are things that we want to introduce that will limit people's autonomy. If I'm walking down the street and I see somebody hurt and in pain, there's an ethical responsibility on me to help that person, even if it's inconvenient. And likewise, if I just walk by, there's going to be some that will say that there's something unethical about not responding to those people. So ethics is about much more than simply making choices that we feel are free for ourselves to choose, but that ethically we have a responsibility to identify things that are the right things to choose to actually do. If a patient undergoes or is recommended by a doctor to undergo a medical procedure or to accept some sort of technology, the patient is the one who gets to make that decision, and that's correct. But autonomy only takes us so far, because the patient now has that right to make that decision, but they must still process whether or not this is the right thing for them to do. Autonomy really only tells us what the right, who has the choice to make the decision, but there's a lot more involved in autonomy and in ethics. This view that Beecham and Childers have advocated is a form of self-rule autonomy, which is like a trump card, that it just tells us who has the right to make the choice and then leaves us there. But autonomy is really only a means towards an end. It's not an end in and of itself. The really difficult decisions around those choices have still got to be processed in various ways through various different types of principles. They've got to process the role of others in our lives. And so I would advocate a form of autonomy that has been called relational autonomy, which accepts that people do make important decisions, and they should make those decisions about their lives, but that we live in relationships, not autonomous bubbles that just bump into one another. And these relationships bring ethical responsibilities which should influence the choices that we make. Abortions obviously involve a pregnant woman, but there are many other relationships involved there. At the very least, there's the role of the father and what he should be choosing to do. A woman may not want to give birth for many different reasons. They're complicated. Many of them are tragic. They are very weighty decisions. And many of them are relational issues as well. And so the role of those relationships needs to be brought in, rather than emphasizing a view of autonomy as a trump card and that it's primarily about freedom of choice. We may have the freedom to choose, but we still have to decide if our choices are ethical. So in a relational approach to autonomy, there is a constant balancing of the impact and the influence of others along with the individual. There is autonomy that is involved in this as well, but there are many other ethical principles involved. When the life of a woman, for example, is threatened by her pregnancy, freedom of choice is not going to be the primary thing that is going to settle this issue. I believe that it is ethical to save one life when two cannot live. But the relational autonomy acknowledges and accepts the complexity that's involved in these types of decisions. That it's not primarily about freedom to choose, but it's about the dynamics of the relationships, the challenges that are involved in these decisions, and that the role of the father, the unborn, the other children, other relationships must be brought into this decision in a way that I believe relational autonomy does much better than self-rule autonomy. Relational autonomy goes beyond the right to choose and includes the responsibility to choose the right thing. And this then requires us to really consider what ways, what issues are going to be brought into this consideration. One important principle is looking at the so-called harm principle, that people have the right to make choices that they wish to, but up to the point at which those choices would harm another. And in abortion, there is always at least one other, and by definition, that other ends up dead. Whatever opportunities or potential opportunities that the unborn might have had, those are terminated. So to determine if autonomous actions are ethical, we need a bigger view of what the good life is actually involves. And this must be balanced, as Joan has said, with other principles like the principle of justice or fairness. But in abortion, where is the fairness for the unborn who is totally powerless and vulnerable? Justice is not simply about identifying our rights and seeing where it is that we can have those enacted, but autonomy intersects with justice in that we act ethically when we use our autonomy to further the autonomy and the good of others, especially the weakest and the most vulnerable. Why this emphasis on the weak and the vulnerable? Well, when we emphasize and stress the importance of protecting the weakest and the most vulnerable, we send a message to society that if you or I ever end up in a situation of being totally dependent, of being among the weakest in society, that society will take care of us. When society values the survival of the fittest or privileges those with the power and the resources, we can have little confidence about what might happen to us if we end up in the group of the weak and the vulnerable. In history, after much effort, white men finally gave freedom to slaves. Men finally recognized the autonomy of women. Doctors have acknowledged patients' autonomy. Those with autonomy have used their autonomy to further the good and the autonomy of others, particularly the weak in those societies and those who had been made vulnerable. And we admire those who have made those choices in the past. The unborn are one group of humans who are least able to express autonomy. Yet if given the opportunity, with the same uncertainties that face all of us in life, they can become autonomous and live out their lives. Their good is to be cared for and protected by society as they grow and develop and reach for their potential. Our mothers did that for us so that we could have the opportunities that we have today. Relational autonomy points to the consequences of our choices and the responsibilities that go along with those. When we get into a car and drive, we take on responsibilities whether we acknowledge those or not. If we get in an accident, we have an ethical responsibility to stop and help. If we get into bed with somebody else, we take on certain responsibilities whether we acknowledge them or not. Intended or unintended, a pregnancy may result. And this is part of why becoming sexually active is such a momentous decision in people's lives, whether they think about that or not. But it's also part of why societies have urged people to reserve sexual activity until there's a committed, permanent relationship there that is ready to welcome a child into society and into those relationships. Now, this aspect of what I'm talking about clearly doesn't apply easily in rape situations. If a woman has no choice in becoming pregnant, how could she be responsible for the unborn that may result? Rape is abhorrent, and you heard a lot of material yesterday that dealt with the challenges and difficulties of addressing this particular aspect of abortion. But the unborn had nothing to do with the harm that was inflicted there. Why should they be the ones that have their chance at life removed because of that terrible situation? If allowing the unborn to grow and develop, protecting them, nurturing them, allowing them to become autonomous, is the right thing in other situations, then how they came to be should not be the determining factor in what determines their chance at life. Certainly after rape, this would be very difficult. It would be very challenging. But I know some people who have been born after rape, and they are very happy with the lives that they have and very grateful to the choices their mothers made. Certainly, this would be very difficult, but taking away the life of the innocent because of a man's crime is not going to take away any pain, nor is it going to promote justice. Allowing life to come from a heinous crime can let some good come out of a terrible situation. But I want to move away from rape again and go to look at abortion more generally, because most pregnancies arise from some sort of a relationship and then immediately create new relationships, the mother, the father, the unborn. Even if they're unplanned, those relationships bring responsibility. Self-rule autonomy means I choose what I want to do in this situation. So then he's gone, and she wants it gone. Self-rule can lead to isolation because of this focus on the individuals that are involved. But relational autonomy means considering what's best for others. How will she be having terminated that little bit of life that was in her? How will he be after running away from probably the biggest responsibility he's had in life yet? And in the middle is a new and vulnerable being, entirely dependent on the choices that others are about to make about it. The ethical decision involves helping those who are depending on us. And this is going to mean that others will need to be involved in helping, to support from either an institutional way, from a society-wise way of putting together ways that support those women who would not otherwise have wanted to keep a pregnancy, but also those immediately around the woman and the man involved in this situation. We may need to start thinking about how we support unplanned grandchildren and about how we are going to provide for and open up our arms to women and babies who are in need. Building a society like this is not going to be easy, but it would be worth it. It's built on a form of autonomy that emphasizes the relationships and the importance of the ethical impact of the choices we make. It would be based on an authentic autonomy, one where people's choices to serve others and to promote the well-being of all people in a living way is going to be the top priority, especially those who are the most vulnerable and the most dependent. I'd like to conclude with a story, a moral fable of sorts. Thionól, two sisters grew up together. They talked about the time when they would have their children together, when the cousins would play together like they had. The older sister went away to the city, got a good job, got married, and tried to have children. None arrived. They tried all sorts of reproductive technology. No baby arrived. The younger sister went away to college, met a nice guy, and got an apartment together for their third year. A couple of weeks into the term, she shows up pregnant. The two sisters got together. The younger one said, "I can't have a baby now. I have no money. My boyfriend doesn't either. I'll never finish college. I'm not ready to be a mother. I need to get an abortion." The older sister went away upset. "How come I can't have a baby? I really want to have a baby. My sister doesn't, and yet she's the one that shows up pregnant. It's not fair." That night, she tossed and turned in bed, and then she dreamt that she was holding her sister's baby. Someone in the dream said something about how could good come from all of this. She wondered how she might help her sister, and then she slept better. She met her sister the next day and said, "I know you don't want this baby, but I want to help. What if this is the only baby you ever get to have? My husband and I can afford to have me cut back on hours so that I'll be able to help you in every way I can." Her younger sister said, "I don't want the baby, but I can see how important this baby could be to you. It might even be good for me. I'll have to think about this more." The real world is not a fairy tale, but stories help us to see the way the world can be when we live out different values. Keeping a pregnancy is a massive decision, and so is terminating a pregnancy. Our society should be one that supports and encourages and forgives people as they seek to make hard choices in ways that are life-enhancing for those around us, that fulfill the relational responsibilities, and that take care of those who are most vulnerable and most dependent on us. And our Constitution should help to point us in that direction also by upholding the equal rights of everybody involved. Thank you very much.
Well, many thanks to both speakers. A very thought-provoking session. And that being so, I think it is appropriate that we have a private session now and the members have a round-table discussion about what they heard. And Dr. McCarthy and Dr. O'Mahony will be here. And then afterwards at 10:45, we'll have a questions and answers session, which will be in public. So we'll start the private roundtable discussion now. Thank you very much.